Hello everyone, and welcome to our beginner chess class presented by the barristers of the Beverly Hills Bar Association. As you saw, we have different membership options. I just wanted to point out that if you are within your 3 years of practice or a law student, you can join for free at the sustainer level, and you can do all of our programs for free. And that's up to 3 years in practice, and it's normally $30 a month. So take advantage of that if you can. I wanted to welcome my friends here. My name is Dira. I am the barrister president, and I practice law here in Beverly Hills. I do business and real estate law. I have with me also moderating the program, Jan Goldstein. Jan is a past president of the Beverly Hills Bar Association Barristers, and he practices also in Beverly Hills at Spartan Law Corporation. He's focusing on business and family-based immigration and trademark matters. And our speaker today is Iris Kokish. She is an active tournament player, chess player, and a coach. She has competed in numerous tournaments around the world. Her most notable chess accomplishments include representing Team USA in Israel and placing in the top 5 in the highest stakes chess tournament on record. It's called the Millionaire Chess Open. Ms. Kokish is also counsel at SAG-AFTRA. And so we welcome you today, Iris. Thank you so much for presenting our program for us. And
yes. Thank you so much for having me to the BHBA and to BHBA Barristers. I am so excited for this opportunity to teach you guys what I think is as close as I could get to a full body workout version as it applies to chess. We're going to talk about some opening principles, some middle game strategy, and we're even going to try and go into some end game tactics at the end to get our brains thinking. This is a big group, so there's going to be, this class is meant for varying skill levels. So some things might be too easy for you, some things might be too challenging, but if you stick with it, I promise you your game will be fine-tuned just a bit, enough to beat family and friends, which is what we all really want. But before I jumped in, I wanted to let you know that I have planned this lesson to be around 60 to 75 minutes with time for questions at the end, so maybe 90 minutes total. I know some of you might want to jump in and watch the debates, that's no problem. And yeah, so I'm just going to jump right into it. The very first thing I wanted to talk about before I start showing you some games is I wanted to make sure we're all on the same page on the difference between a check and a checkmate. So here in this position, white is clearly winning. This is a made-up position. Most of the positions I'm going to show you are either made up or they come from actual games, but this one is certainly made up. White is winning by 2 rooks, and white plays rook to h8. And when I teach kids, I say that rook is shooting a laser beam at that king. And so before you start to get super terrified and think, oh my gosh, I'm in trouble, I'm in a checkmate, you want to ask yourself 3 questions. You want to ask, can I run away? Can I capture the piece that's attacking me? Or can I block? Which means, can I put a piece on one of the squares in between the attacking piece and my king? If the answer to all 3 of those questions is a no, then you're in a checkmate. If there is one yes, then it's just a check. So in this position, and I really want to test out, normally I teach this class not through a Zoom webinar, but a Zoom so folks can just respond. So I want to test out the chat feature. So in this position, is this a check or is it a checkmate? If we ask those three questions, can Black's king run away? Can he block or capture? Yes. Julie, well done. This is a checkmate. You can't run away. You certainly can't jump off the board. Pawns don't move backwards, so he can't block with one of those pawns. And of course, the king can't step on his own pieces. Now, what if I change this position slightly and I get rid of that pawn? What about now? Is this a check or is it a checkmate when you go through those three questions? Is there any square to run away to? Yes, Sarah. Sarah, well done. This is now just a check. Because now when we ask that first question, can you run away? How can I step off this laser beam? Without that pawn on e7, we've got an escape square. And if I can change this position slightly, for example, instead of a pawn on f7, it's a rook. Still can't run away. We still can't jump off the board. We can't step on our own pieces, and we can't step off this laser beam, so we can't run away. We still have no piece that can capture this rook, but what about blocking? Is there any piece we can move to put in between the king and this rook? And rather than ask the chat, just answer that one. Yeah, we can move that rook back to f8, and now it's also just a check. So that analysis, asking those three questions, can I run away, can I block, can I capture? You can actually apply that to any one of your pieces that's under attack. If your queen is under attack, if a rook is under attack, there's no need to panic until you've gone through those three questions. All right, so with that in mind, I want to show you guys a very simple checkmate. Let's say you're up 2 rooks, which is really nice, well done, but that's not the end of the story. Unlike checkers, where you've got to get rid of all the pieces off the board, in chess, you not only have to make a check, but you've got to trap the king so he can't run away anywhere. So your material advantage is completely useless if you're not able to make a checkmate. So here's a rook roller. So let's just take a step back and look at this position. This rook on h6 is shooting a laser beam on this 6th row, which means this king can't use any of these squares as escape squares. It's like he's stepping on that laser beam, he gets zapped. If he tries to go there, it's an illegal move and he would have to take it back. All right, so it's white's first move, and in this position, white is going to play rook to a5. So now let's take a look at how these pieces are working together. Black is asking himself, can he run away, block, or capture? We already talked about how he can't backpedal and step on this laser beam here because of this rook. He certainly can't go to the side here because that's not going to help him get out of this check. So he's got to go down a row. And now we play rook to h4. And I think all of you guys are clever enough to see the pattern now. But what I want to try and encourage you to see is that you don't, just because you can make a check doesn't mean you should. You're trying to trap the king and make a checkmate. So even though, yes, we can continue on making checks like this, he goes back. Let's actually say that king is there for now. I want you guys to use this pattern of a rook roller. He escapes down to the 4th row, and you bring your other rook. And he certainly can't backpedal back up to the 5th row because that's where the rook is covering that line. Can't go to the side, so he's got to keep heading down the board. And just like that, that's your rook roller. So if you're looking to try and force a checkmate with your family and friends, at least you know how to do it with 2 rooks. Before I move on, that was a really basic summary of the difference between a check and a checkmate, but before I move on, do you guys have any questions? Yes, someone is asking a question. Were you able to view this online at another time? Go ahead, Dira.
Yeah, I was just going to say, somebody was asking whether they can view it later because they're confused. They were coming in late. Yes, this program is being recorded and it will be posted later. You can view it at a later date.
Awesome. So, okay, now that we're on the same page between check and checkmate, I want to show you one more thing, one more little lesson before we dive right into some games. So I want to talk about how pawns move by just showing you a set of puzzles. Because sometimes it's not enough to just shout the rules at you. You kind of have to see it and play with it. So the rules for pawns is they can move forward one square at a time, and they capture diagonally. And that can be really confusing when you try and put that into practice. So in this position, how many squares can this pawn move? Got 3 black pawns in front of it. It's a white pawn, so it's going up the board. And knowing just those few rules, that pawns can capture diagonally, but they move forward one square at a time. What are the options? How many moves can that pawn make? Julie, good job. Yes. So because these 2 pawns are here on the diagonal to take, you can capture the pawn on d4, and you can capture the pawn on f4. But he cannot, that's just against the rules. He can't do that because that's just not how pawns capture. Okay, and I'm going to change it slightly. What if I get rid of the pawn on e4? We know that in this position, this pawn could move at 2 options, either take here or take here. How many options does that pawn on e3 have now? Yes, Julie. Thank you, Julie. 3, because now that there's nothing here to take, you can just walk right on through. One last bit here. What if I changed up on you now? Someone besides Julie, get on that chat. So let's see, if I take the pawn away on d4, how many options does white have now? Just 1. Now that there's nothing to take here, we can't jump here. Certainly can't move forward because that's not how pawns capture. So all we've got is this pawn on f4. I also want to remind you guys that when pawns are in their starting position here, they can skip a square, but you don't have to. Every move after that, though, they can only move 1 square at a time. So of course, pawns are all in a row on that second row together. You can skip a square. But again, you don't have to, and more often than not, sometimes a small move like that is the best move. And then let's see, Jan, because Jan said he would volunteer sometimes. Jan, can you, as best you can, there's no wrong answers, explain to us what pawn promotion is?
Pawn promotion.
Yeah. What happens when a pawn gets to the end of the board?
Yep. So you could pick for the pawn to be any chess piece. You could even make it a pawn again.
So yes. So when we go to the end of the board, because we can't go backwards, that pawn has got to turn into something. It's got to be promoted. However, you can't turn it. There are 2 things that you cannot promote it into. You can't turn it into another king. You only get 1 king in chess. That's also why it's one of the most important pieces. You can't turn it into another pawn. So you can't leave it there as a pawn, and you certainly can't put it back in the beginning like that. So just a couple things to keep in mind. And again, before I hop into a game that's going to highlight some good things to do with your pawn structure and some bad things to do with your pawn structure. We're going to see why black loses, why they're making mistakes with their bad pawn structure, so on and so forth. Does anyone have any questions?
Hi, Iris, we have a question. At the beginning of the game, how do you decide when to move your pawn 1 or 2 spaces?
That is a great question. I'm actually going to set up the whole board because I will answer that question for you shortly. But throughout this entire class, I know I ask a lot of little questions. The answer to almost all of those questions, or that you would at least get half right, is if you said center control. So to really quickly answer your question, it's all about the center. Would just moving it once be better for your center? Just one square forward, would that be better for your center? Or is this going to be better for your center? And if you keep asking yourself that question throughout your entire opening and actually for the entire game, it's going to help you formulate plans and you know, have a better position than your opponent. Okay, so now I'm going to answer that question more thoroughly. So in this game, I'm just going to give away the game. White is going to win. Black is going to lose. So we're looking at what white is doing correctly and what black is doing incorrectly to get themselves into a worse position. White plays e4. E4 is E4 is the most popular opening move in the world. And that's because it's also the most reasonable. With this one move, we're activating our bishop and we're activating our queen. You'll notice that pretty much every major and minor piece, bishop and knights are minor pieces, the queen and rook are a major piece, every single one of those pieces needs a pawn to move in order to get into the game. Except for, of course, a knight, which is a special, knights can jump. For everybody else, you really need to start moving those pawns and you need to start moving them from the get-go. So with e4, we've immediately done that. Two of our pieces can get into the game. Another reason why e4 is the most popular opening move is because straight away we're controlling two of the four center squares. This idea of controlling the center is so important in chess. And when I say the center, I don't just mean this glob right here. I specifically mean these four squares: d5, d4, e4, and e5. And what do I mean by controlling one of those center squares? Well, you either are literally physically putting a piece on that square. So by putting this pawn on e4, we're controlling e4, or by shooting a laser beam, sorry, I teach so many kids, putting pressure on another center square. So right from the get-go, on our first move, white has undisputed control of the center. We've got e4 and we've got d5, two of the four center squares. So even though absolutely no pieces have gone off the board yet, white is winning. White is winning because white is controlling the center. And actually, players will sacrifice a lot of material to be able to control the center. Because if you're controlling the center, you're controlling the board. So those are the two main reasons why we like e4. And in fact, in this game, black likes that move so much, they do something very similar. It's the same thing. Black has activated the bishop and the queen and is controlling the other two center squares, e5 and e4. All right. White plays d4, which is a great move. If there are any more advanced players out there, this is called the center game. If you want to look at this opening, Google it. It's a fun one to play. Immediately, white throws its other pawn forward in front of the queen and is already putting the other two center squares into play. I want to encourage you guys to try and build tension towards the center instead of, for example, making small passive moves like this. The more you can throw at the center, the more likely you are to start gaining advantages and controlling the board. So don't be scared to throw pieces towards the center and to attack as you develop. d4 is a great move because we're activating the other bishop and we're developing with a threat. You'll see, remember that pawns take diagonally. There is nothing defending this black pawn. So instead of doing absolutely anything black wants, he's got to respond to this threat somehow so he doesn't lose a pawn. All right, black takes it. Black takes, e takes d. And instead of taking it right away, you know, just a pawn for a pawn and developing this queen too early, which is what you don't want to do in your opening, white plays knight to f3. So I also want to take a moment here and just appreciate how much stronger knight to f3 is as opposed to knight to h3. I know both moves technically develop your knight, but the big difference is that knight to f3, you're developing it towards the center. you're immediately putting pressure on two center squares, d4 and e5. And also what I want you guys to take away is that a knight on the side of the board, even though it's the same knight, as for example, all these other knights, on the side of the board, it's only putting pressure on 4 squares. I'm just going to use my fingers here, G5, F4, G2, and G1. That's 4 squares. Anywhere else towards the middle, that knight is putting pressure on 8 squares. And a piece is only as strong as how many squares it's controlling. So please, if you can, keep your knights away from the edge of the board and certainly away from the corner where they're only putting pressure on 2 squares. I also really like knight to F3, not just because it's towards the center, but because it's developing with a threat. So again, instead of doing absolutely whatever black wants to do and start trying to put its plans into play, he's got to respond to this threat because this pawn is under attack. And you'll see that nothing is defending it. So black plays knight to c3, which we like for all the same reasons we like knight to f3. It's towards the center, but it's slightly different in the sense that instead of an attacking move, like knight to f3 is, it's a defensive move. We're using a knight, which is certainly stronger than a pawn, and we're using it in such a way to defend the weaker piece. In general, that's not how you want to be using your pieces. You rather want your pawns to be defending them, not the other way around. All right, so white is going to keep developing. White plays bishop to c4, and just taking a step back, developing is so important. If you're not using a piece, if, for example, if this knight stays here the whole game, if this rook stays here the whole game, you might as well not have it. You might as well be down a rook and a knight. So make sure you are developing your pieces early and as fast as you can. A good rule of thumb and an opening principle to follow is try not to move the same piece twice in the opening. That's going to help you make sure you're developing like your diverse group of your pieces. I really like bishop to c4. Not only are we getting our bishop into play, but I like it because it's attacking this f7 square. This f7 square for black and the f2 square for white, those are the weakest pawns of these 8 pawns in their starting position. Why? Because you'll see that the only piece protecting f7, and for white, the only piece protecting f2 in the beginning is the king. All these other pawns, they've got major or minor pieces, sometimes 1, sometimes 3, protecting them, but this is a real weakness. And if you can get 2 attackers on this piece in the opening, that's a real threat for your opponent. So right away with bishop to c4, not only did we activate a piece, which is great for development, but we're already hitting the weakest pawn on the board. So black should already be on the defensive. Black plays knight to f6. Okay, that's a good move. Again, knight towards the center, putting pressure on 2 of the 4 center squares, d5 and e4. Again, if you are sort of out of luck, you don't know what to do in a game, if you keep going back to, well, what can I bring towards the center? Can I build more pressure in the center? That's usually going to help you get back into the game and get some sort of an edge. So knight to f6 also is developing with a threat, which we like. You'll see this pawn is defended by none of white's pieces. And it's interesting because rather than defending it, white instead castles. It is so, I can't say this enough, and the second game I'm going to show you is all about castling. It is so important to castle early, and we'll go over the rules of castling later in this workshop too. It's important to castle early because of king safety. This king is now in what I like to call a brick house. It's going to be extremely hard for black to make a check and certainly to make a checkmate. This is now probably going to go into a long endgame type position. So, and once your king is safe in the corner, you can start more comfortably attacking or carrying out your plans. You don't have to worry about random checks coming at you. Unlike black, if we look at black's king safety right now, still in the middle of the board, not really close to castling, so that king is so much more vulnerable than white's king. But we also remember that white did that instead of protecting this pawn. Why is white not concerned about that? My guess is because white will have this move, simply plays rook to e1, puts that rook on this beautiful center column, and you'll notice that the king is also on that column. And so you see how this knight can't run away. This knight is being attacked. He can't run away because that would be an illegal move. That king is in check. So that's a little trap that white set up for black. And that's why white very comfortably castled instead of trying to defend this pawn. In fact, he probably wants black to take that pawn so he can ultimately win that knight. Black is pretty clever, so black is not going to take that pawn. Instead, black plays bishop to e7. He knows that this king is vulnerable in the center, not only because he still can't castle, but because of this column that this rook is most likely going to control. So he puts his bishop on e7. Hoping to castle soon, but also to close up the position a little bit and make his king less vulnerable. I want to take a step back and compare white's position to black's. I really like how open white's position is. These bishops can move pretty far, at least compared to black's bishop. This bishop has yet to be developed. In fact, he's not even moved pawns out of the way, so they can't even develop. It's going to be 2 moves before that bishop can see any sort of action in the game. This bishop and this queen, yes, they're on the same diagonal, but I don't like how they are just closing up the position. They're sort of stepping on each other's toes. And of course, king safety. White is castled, black hasn't. So even though white is down 1 pawn, white's position is much better. After bishop e7, only now does white decide to finally recapture that pawn. White was in absolutely no rush to do that and found it more important to develop and control the center rather than equalize on material. And in fact, when we do equalize on material, our position is much, much stronger. All right, knight takes knight, and the queen takes the knight. So at the end of the day, now we're equal materially, but who's got control of the center? Who would you rather be, white or black? I would certainly rather be white, not only because of king safety, but also because of this colossal control of the center. This bishop and this queen and this pawn are working together to control the board. All black really has is this knight, and it's not enough to really push back on that center. Realizing that this bishop is yet undeveloped and black has to put more in the center to try and get some control back, black plays d6. Again, kind of cramping up this bishop even more. Remember how we played e5 and we said e5 was such a good opening move because it activates our bishop and it activates our queen? Well, this is a really good example of how you can step on your own toes, and it kind of defeats the whole purpose of e5. This knight, even though it's a good move, the placement of this bishop kind of makes it a little claustrophobic. And this pawn move, although I understand he was trying to activate this bishop, blocked this bishop in even further. So even though this bishop is the same as this bishop, they're worth the same amount, 3 points, 3 points. If any of you guys go by that point system, this bishop is so much stronger than this one. This bishop, the black bishop, is so much stronger, and we haven't even developed it yet because it can move so much, has so much more options. All right, so we played d6, and now white is going to start getting aggressive. White is going to try and press its strategic advantage and just keep trying to build up tension in the center. So with f4, we're putting more pressure on the center square. If black played d6 to try and put pressure there, well, now I'm going to play e4 and push back on that. So just keep building up that tension. Don't be scared of it. Black plays b6, which I think is a really horrible move. It was probably to maybe let the bishop out this way, just sort of, I think maybe black is trying to play c5 so it can get that really nice pawn structure there. Pawns, because they capture diagonally, they also defend each other diagonally. So this pawn structure is so much weaker than this one. these pawns are working together and protecting each other. So that might be what black is trying to do. Maybe develop the bishop this way and then c5 to help improve its pawn structure, but that is way too little, way too late. White plays e5. If I ask how many squares can this, assuming black responds very passively like a6, you'll see that this pawn has three options. You can either take this pawn on d6, or this pawn, or this knight on f6, or of course move forward and start making start poking holes in black's defense there. We all know that a knight is a lot stronger than a pawn, so black should be really concerned that his knight is under attack, which is why I find this move really cute. Black plays d5. If you're going to attack my knight, I'm going to attack your bishop. And I think it's a really interesting move because knowing, or starting to understand how cramped black's position is, d5 could have also been an attempt to try and loosen things up. Now this bishop can get out. Hopefully there'll be some trades, so this queen can start getting out. Maybe black can bring their rooks in on open columns eventually. So I think that's a nice move in theory. Assuming all these trades happen, knight, pawn takes knight, pawn takes bishop. But white's got other ideas. Rather than, again, white is in no rush. White is in no rush. Bishop to b5, shooting a laser beam at that king check. So no reason to panic. We just ask ourselves those three questions. Can you run away? Can you block or capture? And right away we see this is just a check. This isn't a checkmate. Black has a lot of options. Black chooses to try and block that check by playing bishop to d7, finally getting this bishop in the game. And developing with a threat, because at the end of the day, is anything protecting this bishop? No. So black is trying to invite a trade, which black will benefit from, because now the queen gets in the game and you can possibly castle queenside. But white isn't having any of it. Now white decides, I'm going to take this knight. And again, we're attacking two pieces. So taking a step back here, you'll see that white has not given up any of its strategic advantages. White did not want to make it easier for black to get his king out of the center. White still has a pretty formidable control of the center, and as always, white has this backup move here at its disposal to play rook to e1, getting a lot of control on that really important center column, and the king is still on that center column. And all of which is made worse by the fact that he chose to take this knight now instead of, for example, trading the bishops first. Instead of dealing with this threat, black takes the more valuable piece, which makes sense, takes the bishop, and at the same time is attacking that rook. So as much as maybe white would want to take one of these guys, white instead takes this opportunity to protect its rook, steps off that laser beam, gets this amazing control of a center column. Not only are we putting pressure on two center squares, but we're also now in this indirect way starting to attack the king in a very real way. So finally it lands on black, and he should probably get away from the center. So black plays king to f8. Yes, he's about to lose some material, a lot of material. This is probably what he's thinking of, but at least it's not mate. At least it's not mate. He can carry on. And this move is super cute because instead of taking this bishop, which yes, is worth more than this pawn, white takes diagonally. And remember, this game, the reason I wanted us to review the rules of how pawns move is because this game is all about pawn structure and how to make the most of your pawns to control the center and to make mating webs, make forks, and ultimately get promoted into another piece. So by taking this pawn on g7, we're shooting a laser beam in this very small way. We're shooting a laser beam at this king. So black has to ask those three questions. Can he run away? Can he block or capture? You'll notice the pawn is just always too close, certainly can't block, and he can't capture. If he were to capture, he'd be stepping on this laser beam here, and that's an illegal move. He just can't do it. You have to take it back. So his only option really is to run away. Black runs away to g8. And we talked about pawn promotion here. So white, to finish the game off, plays g takes h. And he can promote it, and I don't have an extra queen with me, but he promotes this to a queen. Imagine this is a second queen on the board. And now he's asking himself those 3 questions again. You have to go through that analysis every time until you internalize it. Can you run away? Can you block or capture from what is a queen? Just use your imagination, that's a queen. Certainly can't block because it's too close. He can't capture it because it's protected by the other queen. And there's just nowhere to run away to that's a safe square. That queen is just too close. So he lost. Black lost because he wasn't really following opening principles, wasn't doing a good job of controlling the center, really delayed in castling. And I'm going to look, before I move on to the next lesson, I'm just going to check your guys' questions. Okay, so somebody asked, can you please explain moving 2 pieces in 1 move? I will. That's actually exactly what I'll go into next. We're going to talk about castling in detail because nothing causes more fights between friends and family when folks don't know the rules of castling. Yes, Julie already answered that one. Why doesn't black exchange the rook and king? Hi, Levon. Sorry, I missed that one. I'm not quite sure what you are talking about because I think we've moved past the position, but I'll just follow up with you separately. Okay, so now I'm going to clear the board and we're going to do sort of a deeper dive into castling, which is super, super special. It is the only move in chess in which you're allowed to move 2 pieces at the same time. But like anything with chess, it's got some rules associated with it. So I just want to go over what those rules are. Let me get rid of all these guys. Before I move on, let me just check the, okay. No additional questions. Okay.
Before you move on, Iris, Jan, do you see any questions in the chat?
No. So far, there's just been one about how to position the view. So you could actually switch the view from gallery to speaker on the side. But other than that, there haven't been any questions. Feel free to ask, and I'll make sure that they're answered.
Okay, thanks, Jan. Go ahead, Iris. Thank you.
Awesome. All right, so castling happens between a king and a rook. And in order to castle, first of all, you've got to get the 2 pieces of your castling king side. If you castle on this side of the board, it's rightly so, it's called a king side castle. If you castle on this side of the board, it's called a queen side castle. Queen side castle looks slightly different from a king side castle, and we'll go into that. But first, this is what a king side castle looks like, and in order to do it, we have got to move the bishop that would be here out of the way. We've got to move the knight out of the way. And if we were castling queenside, we would also have to add on the queen. So queenside castle is very, it can be very fun, depending on which opening you're playing, but it takes 1 extra move to achieve because you've got to move a 3rd piece out of the way. So it's a little bit slower to get there. But folks really like it because by the time you do queenside castle, boom, you've got a rook already on a center column with just 1 move. So that's also why it's very popular to castle queenside. In addition to needing to move your pieces out of the way, you also cannot have moved your rook in the game yet. And that includes moving it and then moving it back. If you have moved it at all, even if it's back on its starting position, you have lost the ability to castle for the rest of the game. If you have moved, let's say if you've moved your rook, you've lost the ability to castle on this side. You haven't lost the ability to castle queenside. You can still do that because you haven't moved this rook on a1, and that includes even if you put it back. Even if you put it back, you've lost the ability to castle kingside. Some additional rules I want to share with you, the ones that cause the most fights, are you cannot castle when you're in check, so you can't castle to try and get out of a check. You can't castle when you're in check, you can't castle through a check, and you can't castle into check. What does that look like? Well, let's say I'm black and I play bishop to b4 check. And I think, oh my gosh, can I run away? Can I block or castle? Well, I can see how someone might logically think castling is technically running away, but you can't do it. Why? It's just a rule. It's just one of those rules. You can't castle when you're in check. Let's say this bishop is on b5 instead. King's fine. King's not in check. We haven't moved our rook. We haven't moved our king. Well, you actually cannot. This is an illegal move. You can't castle through a check. Because to get to this g1 square, this king has to go through f1. And that's exactly the square that this bishop is shooting a laser beam at. So even in this position, you do not have the ability to castle kingside. We can castle queenside. We're not castling, we're not in check and we're not castling through a check there. We don't have the ability to castle kingside. And then of course, let's say this bishop is on c5. In the same way, we can't just walk into a check. We can't castle into a check. At the end of the day, we just step right onto that bishop's this laser beam. That's an illegal move. We have to take it back. So with that very quick summary, I'm going to show you a game where, yes.
One quick question. So
yeah.
how do you distinguish between an opening, a mid-game, or the end game?
Oh, that's a really good question. Sorry, I missed that one. So, you know, some people will say it's like, on average, it's like 10, 15 moves. You know, that's usually how, when opening theory will stop and now you're in the thick of a middle game. But I like to think of it when your rooks are connected. So let me show you what that might look like. When all of your pieces have developed and you've castled and your rooks are connected, that's usually the sign that, so for example, we've developed our knights in this way, our bishops are out and about, working together. Let me find my white square bishop. Like this, we've got this, and we've castled. Obviously, I'm playing no black moves. This is when I would say this is a middle game. We've developed all our pieces, and our rooks are connected, and we've castled. So when usually it's when I see that pattern, I think it's already the middle game. But if you want to just get super general, it's probably 10, 15 moves once the game is started. Alrighty, good question. Okay, so I gave you just the hard facts of what castling is. So we're going to look at a very specific example and a lack thereof, because black, again, is giving away the game. Black loses this game because they don't castle. They leave their king very vulnerable in the center, whereas white takes the time to castle early and can effectively make a mating web because of it. Okay, so once again, white plays e4. Again, the most popular opening move in chess. Yes, it's okay that this is being recorded. Cool. White plays e4, activating the bishop, activating the queen right away, and immediately snapping up two of the four center squares, d5 and e4. Sorry, I don't know if you guys can hear my dog down there, but he's right under me. Black likes that move so much. Black plays e5 again, activating its bishop and its queen and taking control of the other two center squares. We're going to see that I really like using the center game as an example because of how much it shows us the importance of center control. So we've activated our bishop again, and we're immediately trying to challenge black's control of the other two center squares. We want complete control of the center. And again, players will try and sacrifice a lot of material to get control of the center. Because if you're controlling the center, you're controlling the whole board, and it's going to be easier for you to realize your plans and get advantages. Black takes the pawn on d4, and instead of, in the last game we saw this. We saw it was just one pawn that white was willing to give up. And I just wanted to show you an example of just how far someone is willing to go. White plays c3. White's trying to give up another pawn. And, you know, normally most players would kind of stop here, and they would probably go and try and develop pieces. Again, if you're not moving these pieces, it's like you don't have them. And one rule of thumb is you don't want to be moving the same piece twice. Well, how many times has black moved this pawn already? 1, 2, 3. That's horrible. That's horrible. Even though black is 2 pawns up right now, we've moved the same piece twice. We've developed absolutely nothing. We have no center control. White takes back. Knight takes c3. And even though we're down material, I would prefer to be white in this situation any day. My bishops are open. My queen can step out onto the board. My knight is working with this pawn and this queen. I mean, this is an undisputed control of the center. We've got pretty much all of it. And yeah, and so black plays knight to c6, realizing that, you know what, maybe I went a little too far, got a little too greedy with those pawns, and realizes they should probably develop themselves. So they play knight to c6, which we know is a good developing move, at least much, much better than this one, which I really hope after this workshop you guys will not do anymore. Do not put your knights on h6 or h6. Be brave, go towards the center. Knight to c6 is putting pressure on 2 of the other center squares. And white just keeps at it, developing its knights towards the center. You'll see that this knight to f3 is putting pressure on the other 2 center squares. The same ones that the knight on c6 was trying to put pressure on. So you'll notice how tension builds up that way. Immediately as one side tries to control that center square, you might develop and put pressure right back on that same center square. Okay, and now remember, in order for pieces to be activated, you have to move pawns out of the way. So black plays d6 in an attempt to activate this bishop here. And what you might start already be noticing a pattern. And well, what about this bishop? We kind of just stepped on this bishop's toes because we closed off this whole diagonal that black bishop could have used to get some counterplay on. And now it's going to be another very cramped position for black. White plays a move that I really like. I told you guys I liked it before, bishop to c4, except the last time I talked about bishop to c4, I talked about it in the context of it's a great developing move. It's also a great attacking move because it's attacking this weak pawn here. But now that we learned a little bit more about castling, we also see it not only as an attacking move, but also as a defensive move. Because now that we've moved this bishop out of the way, we're free to castle. And let's just take a step back and look at this position from a material standpoint and from a strategy standpoint. White is still losing materially. We are down some pawns, a pawn, I believe. And unfortunately, or fortunately, it doesn't matter because we're about to castle, purposes of king safety. And in fact, why don't I just jump straight to that? Black is going to play after bishop to c4, plays bishop to e7. It's very cramped, but I think black is trying to castle in their own way as well. Or no, excuse me, apologize. Black plays bishop to g4, a little bit more aggressive here. And so I'll just play this right here. Okay, so here's where we're at. This is the position I wanted us to take an eagle-eye view on. Yes, we've developed some more pieces. Yes, we're up materially as black. But how's our king safety? We're not even close to castling. We have yet to move this bishop and this knight out of the way in order to castle kingside. If our plan is to castle queenside, we've still got one move to go. I'm white, and I've already castled. And I've still got a pretty strong hold on the center. Why bishop to g4? And sorry, I got that confused. But bishop to g4 is much, much more aggressive, and I really want to talk about why. Bishop to g4, if we were to go here, back to this position, pins our knight. If I were to move this knight anywhere, what would happen to my queen? I would lose it. And we all know a bishop is a lot weaker than a queen, so that's a trade that would advantage black. What does that mean? It means I can't move that knight unless I'm ready to give up my queen. So rather than backpedaling, or going and moving the same piece twice, blocking this off so this knight might be free to move, white chose king safety. They saw that pin and they're not worried about it. And I'm going to give away the game again. The reason white is not worried about it is because how horribly placed black's king is. By castling, again, we still got the threat of this possibly. It's just a strategic disadvantage that white is willing to accept in order to keep this king in the center and try and attack that king in the center there. All right, black breaks another opening principle and moves the same piece twice. Black plays knight to e5, which looks like a really clever move. Not only are we placing a knight on a center square, I mean, that is a knight's happy place. If you can put a knight on one of these 4 center squares, that's a pretty powerful knight because you're controlling 8 squares, but you're also putting pressure on these 8 squares that are as in the middle of the board as you can get. So knight to e5 looks good. We're also attacking this bishop, which if you take a closer look is not defended by anything. And this knight, which is pinned, now has another attacker on it. So for example, as much as, white might want to run away. If we were to do that, you see how we would lose this queen. But because this king is so weak, so weak because he hasn't castled, he hasn't even started trying to castle, white does the math and calculates that it's absolutely and completely encouraged for this bishop to take this queen. So that's a queen sacrifice. That's a pretty big deal, and it's not done very lightly. That's a very flashy move. So hopefully white knows what it's doing. Again, look how safe white's king is. Look how vulnerable black's king is in the center, not even close to being castled. And remember how I kept talking about this square being a weakness? If you can just get a second attacker on that square, that starts creating a very real mating web. And in the same way that players will give up a lot of material to gain control of the center, as white did in this game, they'll also give up a lot of material to put a second attacker on this pawn. And some of those games are very fun games. And this is certainly one of them. We have a knight on a center square. We gave up a queen in order to achieve that. And we've got a second attacker on this f7 square. We've just lost our queen. We're down a pawn as well. Still down that pawn. And now white plays bishop takes f7. So again, too soon to start getting scared because we haven't asked those 3 questions yet. Can you run away? Can you block or capture? See how this bishop is making a check? We certainly can't block because there's no square there for us to put a piece on. We can't capture, and the only piece defending that pawn was the king. You can't capture because that king would be putting himself into check. But we can run away. And the only escape square is that e7 square. And because this is so cute, I'm going to ask the chat if you guys can find this mate in 1. And you don't need to use like official chess notation or anything like that. No? All right. So it's knight to d5. We put the other knight on that center square. We're shooting a laser beam at that king. And when you start asking those 3 questions again, you'll see you can't capture the knight. He's too far away. You can't really ever block a check from a knight because knights jump. And he's got nowhere to run away to because these 3 minor pieces are working together so well, and black's position is so cramped. There is no escape square and no ability to block or capture that knight. Run away here, this bishop, and of course these 2 options are non-existent because this knight is covering those squares, and here the bishop, and here this knight. All right, so before I show you guys my absolute favorite, oh, Christopher, knight to d5, well done. So before I show you guys my favorite puzzle, which I call the 3-door puzzle, does anyone have any questions before I move on? When do you determine it's a good time to castle? That's a really good question, Julie. The rule of thumb is you want to castle as early as possible. In fact, if you can do it on move 4, which is the earliest you can do it, I would say do it. The sooner you can get your king safe in a corner, either as in a kingside castle or queenside castle, the better it will be for your game because you won't have to worry about checks or checkmates. How do you anticipate different ways to create checkmate? Seems like it's mostly improvisation versus having a strategy. That's a big existential question. I'm just gonna say intuition, a lot of experience, a lot of playing, and pattern recognition. When you start playing a lot, when you start especially castling and you start practicing with all the ways that you can start poking holes in someone's brick house, you start to develop this intuition on how to attack and especially how to defend against certain types of checkmates. So that one is a big existential question, so I'll just leave you with that. All right, I'm going to show you my favorite puzzle. The objective is to try and promote. We are white, and we are trying to break through that pawn structure to try and get one of our pawns to the end of the board and to promote it into a queen. And so the question I'm going to pose to you is, which pawn do you move? I call this the 3-door puzzle because imagine each of these pawns is a door. There's option A, option B, and option C. How do you break through that pawn structure? Which one do you move? You go to A6, B6, or C6. And the reason I like this puzzle is because you see it appear in so many different places in your game. It could be more towards the center. You're trying to break through the center. It could be on the king side, even way down here. How do you do it? So if you can learn this puzzle, all right, Julie's vote is for B6. Christopher says B6. Does a third person want to chime in before I start analyzing this and letting you go watch the super exciting debate? C6, okay. B6, Sophia, I think I'm going to analyze B6 because that is the majority opinion. It's also the right opinion. So B6, and you might have even, if anyone's just taking like a logic class, you might just have been able to pinpoint it because of the symmetry. So this puzzle is also very fun because the first move isn't the end of the story. You also have to know how to follow up. So let's say, all right, you're going to throw that pawn forward. We already know A6 isn't an option because boom, I've just poked through that force field, as simple as that. So you just left this pawn undefended. I'm going to take it and I'm going to promote to a queen the very next move. So with any puzzle, you have to assume that black is making the best response. A6 is not the best response, so we're not going to analyze it any more than we just did. C6 is not the best response for the same reason. Symmetric, we just take on A7. So what is the much better option? It's probably taking with one of these pawns. A takes B. All right, so now here's the second puzzle. What do we do now? We already picked the right door. We picked B6. But what happens immediately after he takes that pawn? What are we going to do? How are we going to break through that wall? Does anyone who said B6, Julie, Christopher, or Sophia want to let us know how they thought that through? What do we do now? No worries. So what we do now is we say in this position, if it's A takes B, we play C6. So we've got two pawns under attack here. If black takes this one, well, we poke through this way. We don't have to worry about this one. We're closer to making the queen. If instead black chooses to take this pawn, well, now we just waltz right up because the one thing stopping us went this way to take that pawn. And even though we're down 2 pawns, we've poked through that wall and we're going to promote our queen. And just because I want to wrap this up, we just looked at A takes B. And if it's the other way, because it's symmetric, what are we going to do? We're going to do the same thing on the opposite side. Play A6. And either way, regardless of which pawn he takes, black takes, we're going to be able to either walk right through, because we just lost the piece that was defending that square. We just waltz right up. Or if he takes here, just as simple as that. That is my favorite puzzle. So I am all out of things to teach you. So I hope this was helpful for you guys. I'm going to put my email in the chat in case anyone has any follow-up questions. And yeah, thank you so much for joining me for this workshop. I have a lot of fun teaching these. And thanks to the folks who chimed in with some questions and on the chat. Thank you, Dira, Jan, and Alex, and BHBA.
Well, thank you, Iris, for being here. This was very enjoyable. We learned a lot about castling and moves to make and taking the center. So thank you so much. Appreciate it. Appreciate you being here. Thank you, Jan, also for being here and helping out, and Alex for all your tech work.
Thank you guys for a great program. Thank you, Iris, Dira, Jan, and thank you everybody for watching. Have a great evening.